Hey all you people, Snakes in Malay Island here. My retrospective series on Resident Evil is coming to a close very soon, and with that being the case, I figured, why don't I take a look into Capcom's other big IP? You know, the one who's turning a quarter of a century old this coming August. I intend to celebrate the franchise's anniversary with this whole retrospective series, and when I say that, I'm not only referring to the anniversary of the Devil May Cry franchise itself, but also the personal anniversary I have with it. It's been 25 years since Dante and the game first sprang into action, but it's also been 5 years since my journey with it began. And it's been a roller coaster of shifting opinions, hopes and worries for the future, an animated spin-off I have choice words for, what have you. This will be a fun and perhaps nostalgic little endeavor, and I hope that by doing so, I will have a solidified opinion on each entry. So, DMC1. I'll also preface a review of this game by addressing how its entire existence is directly tied to Resident Evil. But you already know all about that shit. It's about as common knowledge as Final Fantasy XV originally being part of a bigger trilogy. But you know, I'm not really interested in regurgitating that very same piece of trivia you've heard time and time again. Not just because it can feel a bit compulsory, but more so because in a vast majority of cases, people are flat out ignoring just how nuanced this connection with Resident Evil is, treating it like some piece of trivia as opposed to an incredibly interesting design philosophy. Is it cool that an entire franchise was spawned from the remnants of a Resident Evil 4 prototype? I mean, hell yeah, of course it is. But the thing I really want to take the next few minutes to discuss are those design traits of early Resident Evil and how embedded they are into DMC1's DNA. But before I do any analysis, I have to make a quick mention of this, so bear with me here. For a while now, the first Devil May Cry was always the one I replayed the most. Yes, even in a franchise with absolute monoliths like 3, 5, and yes, even 4 in spite of, well, everything wrong with it, the one I never hesitated to go back to was that initial entry. And for the longest time, I couldn't quite figure out why that was. But after playing the original Resident Evil trilogy for the first time thanks to our buddies over at GOG, then jumping right back into this game afterwards, I think I finally managed to find the answer I've long sought for. Yes, baby! DMC1 is a full-fledged survival action horror hybrid. I have no doubts about that in my mind. No siree, don't try to argue it, don't even bother, you will only lose in the end, motherfucker. But all posturing aside, it would obviously be foolish of me to not address the huge splash this game made in the action genre. For fuck's sake, it basically coined the term character action. Bayonetta, God of War, the 3D Ninja Gaidens, and Metal Gear Rising are all looking up at DMC1 and giving it a handy. But what I find to be so damn interesting about DMC1 is that it is, essentially, a survival horror through the lens of an action game. People like to dismiss DMC1 on the basis of it being the failed byproduct of an RE4 prototype, and I just think that's foolish. Not only because you're writing off an entire video game for a frankly dumb reason, but more so because those are precisely the things I find to be so interesting about this game, and the things that gives the game its unique identity. I just find this whole combination of fast, stylish action and elements of resource management, all backed by this air of mystique and gothic aesthetics, to be really cool and quite frankly something I don't think I've ever seen in any other video game. Not in any other DMC game, I'll tell you that much. And to articulate what I mean by DMC1 as a survival action hybrid, allow me to propose a question to you all. What is Resident Evil's most defining design trait? Early Resident Evil, I mean. Is it destroying zombies or plant monsters or roided up British dudes? No, it's the act of preserving items over a long period of time. It's the main reason why the survival horror genre is so special, and Devil May Cry's action gameplay and mission-based structure manages to put a unique spin on the formula. In something like Resident Evil or Fatal Frame or Silent Hill or any other survival horror, your best option during 90% of combat encounters is to avoid fighting, so you may preserve munitions for when they are needed most. But as an action survival horror hybrid, Devil May Cry, instead, doesn't suggest players to avoid combat, but rather to employ different attack methods to maximize the resources you gain from defeating enemies. You have to approach combat methodically, but with enough aggression to build and maintain style meter, thus netting you more red orbs so you have a better chance of well equipping yourself for tougher encounters down the line. You could argue that, well, this element is just a standard for the entire series and every game is like this. And I would agree with you if it weren't for the simple fact that items aren't anywhere as easy to come by here. You're only allowed to purchase one vital star at a time, and they gradually increase in price. So the act of preserving helpful resources is still very much intact, but now there's the addition of having to ensure you have enough red orbs to spare should you need to make a purchase of some kind. Red orbs are hard to come by in DMC1, and I feel as if this is a lone entry where they felt more like a legitimate resource as opposed to a mere form of currency. As opposed to later entries where you could easily make 2 purchases per stage, you'll be lucky to make it out of a stage with enough red orbs to survive the next one. In each and every stage, you are fighting tooth and nail to scrounge up as many red orbs as you possibly can across numerous stages and boss fights. And what this winds up doing is creating this sort of dynamic between the flashy slicing and dicing that gives the series its name, with the sheer struggle to survive akin to the series it was born out of. Devil May Cry 1 is the perfect blend of survival and action, bar none. There are plenty of other games that encourage stylish combative efficiency, while also stressing the importance of maintaining resources, but none have felt as perfectly balanced as DMC1. The survival elements have such a deeply mutual relationship with the action elements, allowing for the perfect balance of both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. You learn the inherent satisfaction of destroying enemies with the stylish ranking, while reaping the rewards. Unlike 3, 4, and 5, you're not merely building that stylish ranking for that intrinsic satisfaction, you're doing it to ensure you're able to even fight another day. Your chances of survival are dependent on how you engage combat on a moment-to-moment basis, creating a system that's as tense as it is high-octane and stylish. Like I said before, red orbs aren't as easy to obtain here, and you won't be able to get away with some sloppy play here. Your performance in each and every battle will dictate how the rest of your playthrough goes, just like in those old Resident Evil games. And all of this results in an overall gameplay loop that I just cannot get tired of. I could go on and on, detailing things like combat directly influencing resource economy, which is further elevated by the game's mission ranking system. But before I get deep into either of the game's ranking systems, I think it's finally time to address the elephant in the room. The very mechanic that has gone on to define the series in an abundance of ways. And, you guessed it, its iteration here is much more interesting than it has been ever since. It is also the main highlight of the survival DNA and resource management that I keep droning on about. Okay, enough yapping, time to pull my double trigger. In a gameplay loop that's both action and survival focused, a mechanic like the double trigger is a perfect supplement to this design philosophy. Having your most powerful tool locked behind a resource managing minigame is pretty genius, and much like anything else DMC1 does, it manages to feel perfectly balanced in its execution. It acts as less of a free win fuck everything up kind of tool, and more so something you'll use to swing momentum back in your favor should shit go south. It becomes a matter of active decision making, and I like that quite a lot in my super forms, super attacks, whatever. The Devil Trigger gauge fills up rather quickly, but at the same time, it depletes just as quickly. So you want to make it an effort to activate it only when you feel it is the appropriate time to do so. You may find yourself on top of everything, just fucking everybody up with pure, clean, and flawless techniques, and perhaps you'll then want to enter Devil Trigger mode to put a humiliating end to your enemies. On the flip side, you're getting pummeled into the soil, and shit's looking pretty dire at the moment. A quick switch to your Devil Trigger form should get you right back on your feet. I think that, overall, the Devil Trigger is a tool that accommodates things such as patience and smart decision making. And deciding when to activate it is but one part of the equation. You also must consider the ways you're going to build it up too. And they each come with their own little drawbacks that makes the matter interesting. And fortunately, DMC1 offers plenty of different ways of doing so, with the context of the current situation, again, forcing you to consider how you go about it. For instance, let me use a common scenario as an example. Say you're stuck on a difficult boss battle and you don't have any vital or devil stars to spare, and yet your health is running low all the same. A good way to build up DT in hopes of getting back into the fight is to use Ebony and Ivory to build up DT meter and pray that your maneuvering skills are tuned enough so it don't get bitch slapped into your grave. You can also use a grenade launcher, which is the quickest way of building your Devil Trigger gauge, but it's risky. The animations are very long and you need to be precise. You need to have like the perfect enemy placements or else you're just going to straight up miss, especially against enemies like blades that are constantly moving around. So the best time to use a strat is like against Nightmare, which is just a giant puddle on the floor. You don't have to worry about accuracy or anything like that. It actually came quite in handy when I was playing on hard difficulty. Like, Jesus Christ, I could not imagine any other way of building up Devil Trigger to give myself the necessary health and damage boost. See how interesting this mechanic is, dude? It just goes to show that the Devil Trigger is far more than what meets the eye. It's a fun tool that expands upon Dante's moveset, offering the most devastating moves in his arsenal, but it's also something you have to carefully manage and actually think about before using. Also, does DMC1's Devil Trigger feel much more powerful than the later iterations? Or am I just going crazy? Seriously, Ifrit's Devil Trigger form hits like a goddamn freight train, man. The sheer weight and oomph behind each punch and kick sends earthquakes throughout the speakers on my headphones. But it's not just a vague feeling aspect either. DMC1's DT legitimately is more powerful in terms of the toolkits you're given access to. I have no idea why, but for some godforsaken reason, with the exception of DMC3, DMC1 is the only entry in the series where each Devil Arm has its own unique attacks and cosmetics when DT is activated. When Alistar is equipped, you gain access to a whole new form of mobility with 2 additional attacks you can use while airborne. Also, it made alterations to your guns, like try using the grenade launcher when DT is activated, and you will never want that shit to end. It is an absolute good time. I'm not trying to sit here and knock the other games as DTs. Each of them were designed in their own special ways for their own special reasons, which further proves my point of the Devil Trigger being one of gaming's all-time greatest mechanics. The fact that it can be reinterpreted in each and every entry, yet still retain its core fundamentals is very impressive. We don't talk about this one though, this one didn't happen, it's just not real. But I don't know, man, DMC1's Devil Trigger has always felt the most substantial and interesting in my mind. It is because it makes all those alterations to Dante's moveset, as I just pointed out, but is primarily for the ways it emphasizes this survival/action horror design philosophy. Your big, badass, super duper killer demon form is, again, a finite resource you actually have to manage throughout your playing time. But I've said my piece regarding that, so now let's shift gears a bit and move on to the other gameplay feature, the one that I, personally, think is the ultimate example of intrinsic game design. Devil May Cry's ranking system, whether I'm referring to the stylish meter or the scoring system displayed at the end of every mission, is something I have been eager to discuss in detail for a very long time. Now, I'm finally going to get my chance and by God, do not expect me to waste it. Needless to say, I absolutely applaud DMC's ranking systems. Like I said a moment ago, nothing really screams intrinsic quite like scoring a triple S ranked combo and gaining your due rewards as a result. It is such a simplistic feature, and yet it does so much in rewarding the player, influencing their decision making, etc. There's a reason why combat rankings have gone on to become one of the genre's most recognizable staples. It truly is a brilliant design choice when you really start digging into the nuances of it. Much as is the case with the aforementioned Devil Triggers, the stylish ranking is a feature that's gone through a number of refinements and reinterpretations over the years, each of them accommodating the design philosophies of each particular entry. With DMC5, for instance, having a mountain of different weapons to use and attacks to pull off with them, variety will be the key in getting that sweet triple S rank. The more variety in moves you're in your combo, the higher your ranking. It's so simple, but it works wonders. However, it goes without saying that DMC1 doesn't have nearly the same level of variety and combo potential, and because of that, the stylish ranking here is dictated by sheer damage output instead. Remember when I mentioned something along the lines of methodical yet aggressive combat? Yeah, I was pretty much referring to the way you're going to get S ranks in this game. Instead of having to swap weapons around to keep your rank from depleting, DMC1 revolves around applying pressure against your enemies and maintaining that pressure. If you're not relying on Devil Trigger to get the job done, achieving a stylish rank in DMC1 is not the easiest thing to do. It reverts pretty quickly, and it doesn't just go back to the previous ranking like it does in 3 onwards, leaving very little room for things like maneuvering and whiffing attacks. And you know what? I dig it for those reasons. DMC1 wants players to have a sense of commitment to each action they take, ensuring that anything they do will maintain said pressure, thus maintaining your combo meter and eventually reaching that goal of achieving the fabled stylish ranking. Any one of your inputs could put that achievement at risk, so you're carefully weighing your options, then quickly committing to that next input in hopes that you keep your combo afloat. Since dodge rolling too far away from an enemy could easily result in a dropped combo, you may want to invest in Dante's Stinner to quickly close the gap. If you're in a more enclosed space, then Ifrit's low range but quick strings will come in handy. But no other input exemplifies this aspect of commitment better than the taunt mechanic. A mainstay in the series, except for who should not be named, and for good reason. It's a great way of communicating Dante's personality through gameplay mechanics, which I'm always going to laud no matter what. But better yet, it is the ultimate risk-reward tool. You have access to 2 different taunts in DMC1, one-handed and two-handed, depending on the amount of pressure you apply to the right trigger. The former maintains your combo, while the latter additionally restores 2 DT glyphs. I love this shit, man. Talk about mechanics where taking the risk can pay off in a big way. Your timing has to be perfect, but once you get that shit down consistently, it becomes a fun as hell tool to use. I, unfortunately, aren't anywhere near that level of skill yet, but hey man, I'm practicing. I'll have you know that I am slowly but surely improving. I'm about to play this game on DMD. So take those condescending remarks and stuff them up your urethra. So now that I've got all those out of the way, I guess now will be the time to finally discuss the combat itself. Yeah, finally. And as I had stated earlier, don't expect DMC1 to have the same level of flashiness or combo depth as later entries. It'd be silly of you to have such an expectation to begin with, but I digress. I will say this though, I'm a pretty big fan of the way the series, DMC1 in particular, handles its combo system. You have a basic 1-2-3 string with both devil arms, but you can perform different combos depending on the delay of your inputs. It's a neat little system that A, discourages button mashing, B, has a nice rhythm to each and every move, and most importantly, C, is accommodated by ingenious enemy design. Enemies that will surely punish you for playing sloppily and lazily. See, it all comes right back to the aspect of commitment I was droning on about earlier. DMC1 doesn't have the vastness or complexity a la 3-5, what it has, instead, is a tight moveset where each attack carries some sort of weight, adding on to this factor of dedicated decision making. Dante's moveset here is baby simple, but the ways each attack or combo string contributes to this idea of situational combat design goes quite deep, and of course, the behavioral patterns of the enemies you face complement these philosophies. For instance, let's take a quick run through Alistor's basic combo strings. You have that 1-2-3 string whose finisher is a big overhead swing, and then you have a combo that adds in 2 quick swings with the sword, and of course the one that has Dante going into full crack-headed stabbing mode. They're fundamentally simple combos, and their timing requirements are pretty easy to get used to as well. However, their potential in taking advantage of various situations is where the complexity comes from. Whether it's facilitating crowd control, creating separation, building style meter quickly, or whatever the case may be, DMC1's complexity is less so rooted in what you're able to do, and more so what you can do with what small arsenal you're equipped with, along with the types of variables you'd have to consider before each input. Of course, we also have to consider Ifrit's combos, whose low range and speed, juxtaposed by its immense damage and knockback capabilities, open up a trove of different strategies to take. But now that we've understood how DMC1 functions from a basic combat perspective, we can now shift our focus to the creepy little guys Dante mercilessly pummels. DMC1's enemy design is honestly quite genius. Perhaps some of the most genius enemy designs in any action game I have ever played.
Whoa, slow down, babe.
They're aggressive yet simultaneously methodical, They'll have players carefully analyze an audio and visual cues to create openings or dodge roll away depending on what it is. They have multiple weaknesses players can exploit through careful strategizing. Their smart, unpredictable nature keeps players always thinking ahead. Yeah, pretty much anything you could say to describe good enemy design can be repeated here. And hell, a good example of this lies in the very first enemy type you come across, the Marionettes, or the Bloody Marys. The Marionettes come in 5 different colors, with each color representing things like health and general behavior. One color type will exhibit more aggression from melee range, the other type is more of a long range sort of fellow. The tendency to parry attacks differs between them, yada yada, and it's up to the player to decipher the differences between his color-coded enemies, and upon doing so, this basic enemy type becomes immensely fun to fight. Especially when they're in large numbers, which sadly becomes more and more of a rarity on later difficulties. Which is understandable, but man, I would have loved to take on like 20 of these guys in one room with Dante's entire toolkit unlocked. God, now that reminds me, could you fucking imagine what it'd be like if this game had a bloody palace? It'd honestly give DMC3s a run for its money. I mean, Nightmare practically gives us the perfect battleground for a bloody palace. Just plop a large crowd of marionettes into that biznatch and let the carnage, like, begin or something. I'm positive there's a mod for it somewhere, and assuming it exists, you can bet your sphincter I'm giving that shit a go. But getting back on track, that longing for larger and more frequent marionette battles is quickly subdued by the other enemy types that are mostly even more of a blast to take on. Each enemy type offers numerous different means of engaging with them, all of which are dependent on various circumstances as well as your own level of skill. Blades, for example, are so much fun to fight, and are a great test of not only your movement skills, but your crowd management skills as well. You often show up in pairs of like 4 or 5, where their attack patterns are super aggressive, super unpredictable, and can deal tons of damage. More importantly, their super durable exterior armor makes approaching them from behind more of a risk, but the trade-off is a guaranteed critical hit. So if you're confident in your skills and you think you can just give these guys some nice old back shots, then take that risk and show the world how flexible Dante can be. But moving on to other enemy types, you can bait Sin Scissors into an attack, parry it with a high time, then blow its face off with a quick and easy shotgun blast. Or you can get super in character with Dante by enemy stepping it and then slam dunking that bitch like your Shaq.
Double kill.
But the cool thing about DMC 1 is that you'll eventually face enemies that are essentially an upgraded version of a class you've probably gotten used to by then. Talk about a neat way of really giving players a skill check. Like, I've heard so many stories of players getting hardcore filtered by that Death Scissor in Mission 6. In a brilliant twist that subverts player knowledge, they'll face this enemy that is functionally similar to the aforementioned Sin Scissor class, but is ramped up in health, speed, and in damage. Not to mention an increase in erratic behavior that's emphasized by this insane spinning attack that it does. I like this because with the Sin Scissors, you'll likely have adopted an optimal strat to use against them, but with their stronger Death Scissor counterpart, you'll find yourself really testing the effectiveness of that strat. Fetishes and Frost are of a similar nature, but aren't anywhere as difficult to fight. Ironic because their first appearance comes after the Death Scissors, but I digress. Fetishes are also more erratic and have stronger defensive capabilities, while the Frost deal greater area damage and are generally more of a tank. Yeah, I really enjoy fighting these guys. I don't think there's a single enemy class that I don't enjoy fighting. DMC3 may have the strongest variety in enemy design, as well as the highest highs in enemy design, but DMC1's enemy lineup is just so compact, so tight, so intricately designed, that I don't think I'll ever grow tired of dealing with them. Hence why I always find myself coming right back time and time again for extra playthroughs. And then there are the boss fights, which just take everything I'd already mentioned with the basic enemy designs and either multiply it or subtract it, depending on who we're referring to here. Unfortunately, the Devil May Cry series has long struggled with consistency in their boss lineups game to game, and his first rodeo is no different. Phantom is a lot of fun, and I like to think of him as a test for recognizing visual cues. Plus, being able to jump onto his thorax and beating that little spider ass into submission is a lot of fun. Nello Angelo is an even stronger example of this. Each attack he does instills a sense of tension, where you have to quickly decide whether or not this will leave an opening you'll take advantage of, or a warning that you should back out before you get fucked up. Nothing says fight or flight mode quite like deflecting one of his attacks, then watching him just hold his sword in the air, anticipating that very next move. Each of his animations have a cue for a specific action that'll precede it, and the process of learning said cues is an enthralling one. Fighting this guy in hard difficulty with no devil trigger at all is genuinely some of the most fun you'll ever have, especially once you've got all of his different patterns figured out. And the way he constantly switches things up and never operates on a fixed schedule means players simply cannot get comfortable with pattern recognition. You have to be thinking 10 steps ahead of this motherfucker, and your inputs, dodging or attacking, have to be perfect. Devil Trigger has to be used so wisely, as you're gonna have a hard time rebuilding that gauge once it's depleted. Nello Angelo is a tough beast, but he is a fair one at that. Truly a brilliantly designed boss through and through. He is awesome. And you know what? Lately, I've grown to be kinda fond of Nightmare. I'll admit, this blob motherfucker had my ass filtered as if my name was Britta, but much like Nello Angelo, there are very distinct patterns of attack the player must grow to recognize. I used to write this little guy off as nothing more than mere projectile vomit, and while on the surface that is the case, should you grow to learn how Nightmare functions as a boss, then you could clear it while taking minimal damage, despite it having a wide range of different projectiles it heaves at you. Allow me to go through them real quick. Once a light switch is activated and Nightmare reveals itself, it will begin spawning these little laser balls, which is your cue to run in a continuous circle until Nightmare begins exposing its weak point, where it will summon a giant spinning blade that twirls directly around it, fire a huge laser directly in front of it, shoot these weird blade arm things in the direction you were previously standing, or fire off these white and black projectiles that are fast and do a lot of damage. The main visual cue here in determining which of these attacks Nightmare will do is the area on his body where its weak point appears. If it's on the uppermost portion of its body, spinning blade. If it's on the lowermost, fuck you laser. You're welcome. Griffin, on the other hand, yeah, I never really did enjoy fighting this guy. He mostly stays airborne, diluting much of the encounter into a gun and air raid fest. Also, this spinning blade that keeps Dante suspended in the air, I fucking hate it. Why is this even a thing? There isn't much else I can say about him, unfortunately. His boss fights never really did much for me, but I do enjoy the banter Dante has with him. Hard to believe he'd become this wisecracking little pigeon he is in DMC5, by the way. But there lies one other boss that I feel very conflicted on. It should be obvious who I'm referring to, since it's the only one I've yet to mention, but for those who are scratching your heads, the boss I'm referring to here is Mr. Mundus, the final boss of the game, and a pretty weird one to cap off an otherwise near flawless title. He has two distinct phases, the first of which takes place in space with Dante in permanent DT form, while the second phase is more of a sensible choice for a final boss, I guess. Yeah, to be honest, I think I'd much prefer it if Mundus' second phase were his only one, because who in their right mind is gonna miss that first phase? Like, of all the dumbass gaming tropes that I cannot stand for the life of me, the worst one is a final boss whose mechanics are way different than the rest of the game. Final bosses are meant to be the ultimate test of everything you spent the past few hours learning, so why the fuck am I throwing red things at these glowing balls in outer space? I did nothing of the sort in any other mission, what fucking gives, fella? But that's not even addressing the meat of the issue here, which, to me, is a simple fact that this phase is just purely not fun at all. You'll need to stay on the move in order to avoid the obscene amount of projectiles he hurls at you, all the while you still have to break 4 glowing orbs in order to even damage the fucking guy, meaning you can't move too fast or else you'll put your accuracy at stake, which, you know, leads to you getting hit by those fucking projectiles, especially those goddamn needles from like Halo. These fucking things, dude. It feels like they're not even hitting me and yet I'm still taking damage for them. How the fuck do these things work? What are the damn hitboxes? And there aren't even any interesting mechanics at play here. This phase is just a migraine, especially on higher difficulties. There's an overall feeling of just mindlessness to this phase, and I just do not enjoy this shit. Not one bit. But then we get to his next phase, and all is immediately forgiven. Thank God this phase rocks as hard as it does, for had it not, this fantastic game would have ended off on a rather sour note. Granted, you won't get much out of this phase on a normal playthrough, because he can be easily double triggered to death, so as long as you have the sword of Daddy Dearest in hand. But it's on the higher difficulties where this guy becomes a whole other beast entirely. His first phase mostly felt like a test of luck as opposed to a test of skill, but this second phase is absolutely a case of the latter. A test of platforming skills, precise inputs are needed to mount the slowly moving platforms, allowing you to perform melee attacks on them. A test of dodging skills. Mundus will launch an array of different projectiles, and they can be tough to evade cleanly. A test of pattern recognition skills. Each action Mundus takes will be preceded by a particular hand gesture of some kind. Compile all of that together while adding in the general tension of the fight, and you struck gold. And again, the fact that it comes after such a stinker of a first phase makes it all the more satisfying. So in terms of general presentation, this is the one thing that everyone agrees is done very well. From the first moment of the opening stage, you can just feel the melancholy dripping off the walls of the castle. The ambient music that plays is droning, but is layered with a subtle hint of classical. The architecture is uniquely gothic, and the layouts of the rooms have this unusual feel to them, consistent of sprawling corridors and just a general lack of practicality. These compounding elements help to give Malay Island an almost surreal vibe. And look, I understand that surreal is a bit of an overused term, but allow me to speak my piece. The things that I feel give Malay Island a surrealist feel don't merely begin and end with the stuff I just mentioned, it also extends into other elements of the game that are pretty divisive. We'll start with the story first since it's easier to discuss. You're given very little context to your overall mission. Some woman resembling someone important to Dante comes barging in, goes apeshit on your ass, then tells you an ancient demon king is about to plop out of his island and enact doomsday. You're provided with Sparta's and by extension Dante's backstory, but that's pretty much it. Then you're thrown into the castle where the first thing you notice is a drastic juxtaposition in tone. That opening cinematic was this mix of slapstick and high-octane action, which is immediately contradicted by the somber atmosphere of the castle. And fuck it, I kinda dig this decision. The sheer tonal shift is an understandable turnoff for many, but if you're asking me, I think it manages to establish Malay Island as this otherworldly, almost dreamlike location. Not to mention the fact that we see Dante confronting the horrors of his past, further making this entire endeavor feel like something of a nightmare. Hell, we even have a boss named Nightmare, like, come on now, I don't sound that crazy, do I? Anywho, reflecting on Dante's trauma once more, we're eventually treated to this cutscene following Nello Angelo's final encounter, and it is just the hardest shit ever, man. Take a look real quick.
Virgil, Dante, happy birthday.
Wow! I want chocolate! No, I want chocolate!
Hardcore. Such a cold ass scene, gives me chills every time. But unfortunately, I can't really think of anything else to say about the story. Nothing substantial at least. I like the dynamic Dante has with Trish. I like this cutscene right here. You know, the one playing on screen right now. Yeah, but I like that cutscene. It's a pretty funny cutscene. It's pretty good. Jokes aside, I'm not sure there's any possible way you can take a line of dialogue like this and make it sound profound in literally any way. It was quite literally doomed from the get-go, but we got a funny-ass scene as a result, so everything worked out in the long run. But moving along, we have but one last thing to discuss before I begin wrapping up this video with my final topic. The thing that has filtered so many players for the past quarter of a century. The thing that many naysayers first point out without a sliver of hesitation. So, regarding the way DMC1's camera works, it doesn't quite use static angles, a huge misconception people just roll with, not even realizing that it's flat out wrong, but it does feature a dynamic system that the player cannot control. This ended up alienating a ton of players, citing that the lack of direct camera control rendered a lot of the game's joystick inputs to feel unwieldy. And yeah, while there is a bit of a learning curve at play here, I happen to think that a vast majority of the framing in this game works pretty well. Yes, I actually like DMC1's camera system quite a bit. Sue me, motherfuckers. You know, I also like Super Mario 64's camera system. Like, come at me, bitch. The cinematography is pretty impressive in the ways it showcases the scope and scale of Malay Island, while also keeping the character perfectly in frame. The player shouldn't have to worry about the game obscure and Dante, and if we're talking directional inputs, dude, come on. Unless you're on your first playthrough, this should not be a legitimate problem that you have. You know how in fighting games your directional inputs are swapped if your character starts facing the other side of the screen? Well, same shit here, except it's just a 3-dimensional action game. No problem here, folks. Just stop bitching and get filtered. Or get good. Or die. And please, don't delude yourself into thinking this game aged poorly. It plays perfectly fine, you just need to engage it with a different mindset than your typical action game, because DMC1, evidently, is not your typical action game. It's such a unique game with unique design philosophies, unique encounters, unique visuals, unique everything. DMC1 is a very weird game, especially in respect to the games preceding it. But that's precisely what makes it so special, and that's precisely why, despite 3 through 5 having more on the likes of mechanical variety and spectacle, I still go back to it more often than the others. I'm feeling a solid 9 out of 10 on Devil May Cry 1. See you bitches later.